This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey and Brian Tripp with you here as we got a lot to cover, Tripp. We have some breaking news in terms of we finally, after banding about it on Friday, have an idea. We now know where Jim Knowles is going. We'll talk about that impact as Jim Knowles goes from one Big Ten school to another. We have some transfer portal winners and losers in the conference we'll break down here as well. But obviously the big story of the podcast, you're wearing the hat. It is Monday morning. Congratulations to you. Congratulations to the Eagles fans we have in our audience. Congratulations to the Chiefs fans we have in our audience, because the matchup I think everybody in America wanted for sure. In the Super Bowl, we get a rematch from 2 years ago. Eagles, Chiefs. Tripp, I can already tell you're on cloud nine.
Well, I am. I'm not sure that the rest of America is, though, for this matchup.
You don't say, huh? Well, what makes you think that? Wow.
It's just a hunch from what I've followed on social media.
Yeah, I thought for sure everyone was clamoring to see more Chiefs. I mean, look, it's not the Eagles. I think people are excited to see the Eagles. Obviously, some Big Ten connections there, highlighted by Saquon Barkley, doing what Saquon Barkley did a lot at Penn State and now is doing a lot with the Eagles, not so much the Giants, but a lot of the Eagles here ripping off big runs, scoring touchdowns, a hat trick for 26. Got to feel good. Got to feel good. I know you don't want to take Super Bowl trips for granted. That's now, what, number 3 in your lifetime?
This will be number 4.
Oh, excuse me. That's right. Oh, yeah. 05. I forgot. My apologies.
The Eagles have been to 4 Super Bowls and 8 conference championships since the Cowboys last have reached a conference championship. The Eagles had 7 rushing touchdowns in yesterday's game. The Cowboys had 6 rushing touchdowns all season. But it's not about Eagles Cowboys. It's not about.
Come on.
It's not about.
This is about you.
No, not at all. It's about, man. I don't know, that this one's a little bit different for me as an Eagles fan, and we'll get to what people really care about here on the podcast in a minute. But this one's a little bit different. In 2017, because they hadn't been there since 04 and hadn't won the Super Bowl yet, it was, oh my goodness, I can't believe they're there. 2022, it was such a different cast of characters 2 years ago from the team that had won the Super Bowl, that it was the longevity, the sustainability. The organization has been so incredibly successful since Jeffrey Lurie's taken over as the owner. And that even dates back to Ray Rhodes in the late 90s. Then obviously Andy Reid, Donovan McNabb, Mike Vick, to the Doug Peterson, Nick Foles, Carson Wentz, who's the backup quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs?
Carson Wentz.
Could you imagine?
What a story that'd be. Mahomes gets hurt.
If something would happen. Now, we know the NFL refs wouldn't let Mahomes get touched, but that's another story for another day and probably for another podcast or another radio show that you're going to do. But this one, I think it's because it's their second time there in 3 years, the third time here over the last 8 years, right? They have to win. Like, it's not getting there is great, and you don't take it for granted because it's hard. But they have the best roster. They have the best team. And Barkley's had this remarkable season, as great of a season as any running back in the history of the National Football League. And it makes you wonder, what would his career have been, right, if he wasn't stuck in New York for the first 6 years of it? I'm not saying even on Philadelphia, which has the best line, running quarterback, like the whole thing. Even if he was just on an average team for his first 6 years, what would his career have been? But it feels like, to make this run complete, the revenge against the Chiefs, they have to. I'm happy they're there. It's so cool when your team makes it and you get the 2 weeks leading up to it in the game and you have 100 million people watching the game. But I really want to win. And that's why I think I'm excited, but also I'm hesitant to get overly excited, because if they don't win it this time, I'm not going to be happy.
It feels, I'm sure, like a lot of how Ohio State fans felt, right? I mean, I'm sure they felt more confident going into their game against Notre Dame in the national title game. But it's like we talked about the pressure right on Ryan Day and getting through after losing to Michigan. And it's like getting to the national championship game. It wasn't like, okay, season's over. If we win, it's gravy. It's we got like finish the job. Let's get it done.
Yeah.
Kind of the same thing here with the Eagles. Like we got here awesome. But like a lot of that, I don't say goodwill is wiped away, but like it almost feels like get it done or else. I think
it would be different if they had to go through the line. Like it's the same thing. You look at the college football playoff this year, and you talk about how teams, their path to get to the semifinals and to the championship. If the Eagles had to go through the Lions in Detroit to get there, I think you'd feel a sense of accomplishment. But because of who they had to go through to get to this point, it's like, and they didn't have to leave the link.
Yep.
Again, I will say this though, I want to move on, but watching Barkley and what he's done this year, all I could think about is how did this man never win the Heisman Trophy? So we looked up in 2017, it was Baker Mayfield was 1, Bryce Love was 2, and Lamar Jackson was 3. All had great seasons. And I know like Penn State that year lost a heartbreaker in Columbus in 2017. But to watch Barkley, who I think is making a case for one of the greatest single seasons in NFL history, regardless of position. You can look back at Manning and Brady when they set records, and Jerry Rice and Calvin Johnson, like Megatron the year he had, or Randy Moss when he played with Brady. But I truly think it's in this day and age for running back to put up those kind of yards and have that kind of impact on a team. And if they win the Super Bowl, how did that player not win a Heisman Trophy? Especially when you look at some of the highlights from his games that he played at Penn State. Everyone talks about the Rose Bowl run. But I think the best game Barkley played is when they walked it off at Iowa, when he single-handedly the entire game, with the exception of the touchdown pass at the end that McSorley threw to Juwan Johnson in the back of the end zone. Barkley single-handedly, that's the most impressive single game at the collegiate level that I have witnessed, watching, following continuously over the course of a game. The guy's ridiculous. He's ridiculous.
He's a home run threat no matter where he is on the field. And you're seeing now, once you get a good offensive line in front of him, he's unstoppable. 2,000 yards.
Saying the same thing about Mahomes, right? Like, I mean, but Mahomes is the same way. Like, this is the greatest quarterback. Mahomes, Brady, Barkley, all great, all-time greats at their positions. It's not like they won the Heisman. It's just I guess it's a different day and age. It's a different era. It's a different level of play. It's team, organization, development, so many things that factor into it. There's a million players in college football. But it's kind of wild to think about, like, these are the generational all-time greats. And I hate to bring up Brady because we heard enough about him yesterday. Did he drive you nuts too?
I thought it was okay. I thought it was one of his better games he had.
I think he's good. I don't know that he's number one quality yet.
No,
because he's not Greg Olsen, but he's certainly still one of the better analysts on TV. I think that's the tough thing. Like Brady, with what he's being paid and the expectation of, hey, you're just being slotted into a number one broadcast team. You better be, Romo instantly was great. Olsen instantly was great. And I think that's really difficult to do at that level. I think he is pretty good. And I'm sure with another year or two of development in that role, he'd be excellent. But man, yesterday he just would not stop talking. I'm like, Tom, shut up.
I think he's better than Romo at this point. I think Romo's really regressed. But like with how much he was able to win games with his mind, right? I was hoping that more would translate to the broadcast booth. And like, it does feel like he's fine. He's not terrible. He's not the worst thing you've ever heard. Yeah, he's solid. I just feel like we would get more high level insight, some good, like just things we wouldn't think about, haven't heard before. I thought we'd get more of that insight from Tom Brady so far in year one. Like you said, he's got that long contract. So in theory, he's going nowhere. So there's only room to grow and get better. We'll see how time does go. But yeah, I mean, buckle up for the Super Bowl, buddy. He'll be hearing a lot of Tom Brady after the next 2 weeks.
Yeah. Holy cow. Anyway, Anyway, should we get into the actual meat and potatoes of the pod now?
Yeah, because you're happy. Philly fans are happy. And I would venture to say Jim Knowles is happy for two reasons. Number one, as a Philly guy, I'm sure he's an Eagles fan, so I'm sure he was very excited on Sunday. But also, number two, this man got paid. And it came down, it was reported over the weekend, but now finally made official on Monday morning. Jim Knowles is now the new defensive coordinator for Penn State, signing a 3-year, $9.3 million contract. He is the highest paid coordinator in college football history. Penn State made a huge splash. And Tripp, when you look at it from Penn State's perspective first here, I don't think it can be overstated. Like, this is one of, I think, the greatest hires Penn State's ever had in their history, not just because you're getting the best defensive coordinator in the market to your team in a year in which you were going all in to try to win a national championship, but also, like, look at how it happened, right? He just was a national championship defensive coordinator at Ohio State, the team that Penn State's been stubbing their toe against now for years, unable to get past. And you're able to basically throw as much cash as you can at him, get him out of Columbus, and bring him now to your team. The timing, where they got him from, coming off a national championship, I don't think it can be overstated enough. This is one of the most impactful, biggest moves I think Penn State football history has ever seen.
Yeah, and I think it goes beyond, I know you're alluding to this too. I think it goes beyond the guy in the scheme, right? In this situation. Yeah,
Right.
like it's such a big picture move, and time will tell how it plays out. Ultimately, Penn State was going to get someone that was going to be successful in that role. But you're talking about showcasing a $9.3 million investment over 3 years for a coordinator to make him, as you said, the highest paid coordinator in the history of the sport. So when James Franklin talks about alignment and support at the highest levels with his athletic director and his university president, all of a sudden Penn State, whether it's NIL, resources at the school, infrastructure, they're pushing all their chips to the middle of the table, where you now, I think, because you see the investment Penn State is making, how they are all in, the success, obviously, that they've had on the field, still that last hurdle to get over. But you now are talking about, it was always Penn State kind of like, well, they're close. They're close. They need to break through. I think even though they don't have the signature win yet on that national stage at that level, when you talk about the elite programs in college football right now, because of what they put their money where their mouth is, you're now talking Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State's in that. Even though they haven't broken through and won it the way that the other schools have, Penn State is right there at that same playing field now as those other schools, where it was always Penn State, well, they're a little bit behind Michigan, a little bit behind Ohio State. They're there. So number one, it shows the investment that they've made in the reality of the situation. To get a guy to make a lateral, or some would even say a step down, like, right, in the comparison of Ohio State, Penn State, you have a guy going same conference, same position to another conference school. And this isn't, you had Chip Kelly, really unique, UCLA head coach in conference, taking a step down to go to Ohio State to be the offensive coordinator. Here you got the guy who just won the national championship at the elite program in college football, Ohio State, going to Penn State, biggest rival outside of Michigan, but in terms of like actual, like huge rival, head to head every year, tight game. You got to beat them to get there. You just don't see that. So Penn State takes from the team that they're trying to get above. And now you have what you hope is the missing piece schematically to what you're trying to do defensively, and the feedback and the resource of the one guy who the last two times he's played an Andy Kotelnicki offense has kept him out of the end zone. He's the only guy to have done it. So this is a guy that James Franklin targeted when they hired Manny Diaz. This is a guy that they target again here. And they somehow, regardless of what happened at Ohio State, and there's all that conjecture in Columbus. Well, is it Larry Johnson? Is it Ryan Day? Is it Chip Kelly? Why didn't this work? What's the money? They certainly made an offer. Was it as high as Penn State's offer? It doesn't sound like that. Why didn't he come back? How did Penn State outbid Oklahoma? How'd they outbid Notre Dame? Jim Knowles is now at Penn State. And it's so much more than just, right, okay, here's a guy who produced an elite defense the last couple of years. I think it's the overall, the perception of the program, the shifting of it. Like, it feels like a bit, and they have to do it on the field first, but it does feel like a power shift in college football where now Penn State is at that same seat at the table where Ohio State has been, even though they don't have the trophy or trophies that Ohio State's been able to pick up the last couple of years.
Jim Knowles put out a statement on Monday. I want to read it to you. Tripp, it says, quote, "I have always had a ton of respect for Coach Franklin and the program he has built here. I look forward to working with his tremendous staff and group of student athletes, and I'm ready to get to work." You talk about part of
Hold on.
What?
That's from the press release, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know he approves it, but these are just PR people writing statements. But, like, come on.
Look,
You know better.
I'm not saying. I'm just reading. I want to give, the audience here he has commented on it. This is somewhat breaking news here. Is like now it's at least official on Monday morning. So, we don't get much breaking news. So I'm trying to just
Did you read
add
James
some color.
Franklin's Did you read James Franklin's statement?
I did not. Does it sound very similar?
Join me in welcoming Jim Knowles back to his home in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as the defensive coordinator of Penn State football. He's a strong strategist and excellent defensive mind. He reflects the core values our culture of excellence is built upon. We look forward to having Jim and his family join us in Happy Valley. Like, okay, yeah, some of the language in there is Coach Franklin language, but have you ever heard Coach Franklin start a press conference or an interview and go, "Join me in welcoming Jim Knowles back to his home in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as the defensive coordinator"? Like, it's PR. It's PR. It's PR.
Look,
it's PR.
It is. And I get you're not going to say, "Hey, we're going to beat Ohio State. Can't wait to go into the shoe and kick their ass when we play them later." Like, I get you're not saying anything crazy. I was just trying to give some color. My apologies here for reading what is now. We've read two bland ass statements. So if no one will say anything, then we will. How about this, Tripp?
I'm sure there'll be a press conference, media availability at some point. But I'm not taking any, and I don't mean to poo-poo your prep here, but I'm not taking any, that's from a press release. You and I probably know who wrote it. I'm sure he signed off on it, but come on. Come on.
Yeah, I wish he said I can't wait to go to Ohio State and show Ryan Day what he's missing out on. Can't wait to tackle whoever their quarterback is. Julian saying, "Watch out, I'm coming, baby."
So for you, do you agree, with Penn State, this is a statement, we're here? We'll get to the Ohio State side of it, but the team that gets the guy first, this feels like the elevation, the continued trajectory of Penn State reaching a national semifinal for the first time in this playoff model. Still ultimately falling a win or two short from where they wanted to be. But then you get the guys coming back. Now you land the home run defensive coordinator hire. You're getting a new stadium. At least a refurbished stadium that's almost at $1 billion price tag. You're getting facility, training, all these things. It's just the continued ascension. Ultimately, they have to win. There's a lot of pressure going into next season.
A lot.
And it's a tougher schedule. You don't know a lot can happen between now and this time. Literally, we're only a week away. The national championship game was 1 week ago today. It doesn't. I don't know what it feels like it.
It's either next year or 2 years ago. It's on the 25th. So and we're sitting here on the 20. It's basically a year from now. We'll be talking about who's the national champion if Penn State, like you said, gets it done. To your point, though, the investment Penn State has made, because it always just felt like Penn State, whether it's a talent perspective, a coaching, they were always slightly below. Maybe if Ohio State, Alabama, et cetera, at an A+, Penn State was always at an A- level, B+ level, depending on some years. They were never near or at the top of the truly elite programs in college football in the James Franklin era.
Yeah, I mean,
this offseason feels like they're there.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but even looking at their recent recruiting classes, James Franklin has always had a top 15 recruiting class. And there's been some years where and it's not just a final recruiting rankings, not the be all end all. And there's some years where they've been, certainly a couple years ago, when you get Aller and Carter and Singleton, who are all big time guys. Right. They've had top 7, top 5 classes, right? Mm-hmm. But Ohio State's top 5 every year. Alabama's top 5 every year. Penn State's in the neighborhood, but it's not like they're always bringing in that's the best running back in the country, best quarterback in the country, best wide receiver in the country. Like, they've hit on players and they've done incredibly well. Micah Parsons, like the list you can go through.
They've developed really well.
And
Absolutely.
they've developed guys. But I think they don't have, or at least haven't had, the quantity of the player that, like, the depth and the quantity of it. And they've really probably out-coached and outperformed almost because of what they've built and because of James Franklin. Honestly, they've probably, with the exception of the games that everyone talks about, they have been as consistent, as dominant, as good as anyone. But they've almost outperformed their ranking in some way. And if you're just going like based off recruiting and what they had available. And I think this is a thing now. For a couple of years, they started to build. And it just seems like the slow and steady climb the last 2 months, honestly, has gone from slow and steady to, okay, we're ready. We're all in. Here we go. And maybe it started with Pat Kraft when he got the job. But now, here we go. And that's where it feels like they're at right now. Because of
it does. And also, too, you look at Jim Knowles, right? And you mentioned it in, James Franklin's statement, and we'll say James Franklin wrote a quote unquote. But it's like, he talked about, he brings more than just a schematic edge, Knowles does. And like we talked about in the open, right? He's a Philly guy. And that's an area Penn State at times has struggled. There's a lot of talent in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. And now you bring a guy that not only, again, is one of the best schemers and play callers on the defensive side in college football, but a guy that has ties to an area with a lot of talent, with so many blue chip prospects that now if you can tap in and get those guys to go to Penn State instead of Georgia or Ohio State or Michigan, you're looking at not only the coaching improving, but the talent as well improving to where now they are more consistently in the top 10, maybe compared to the top 15. Like, you look at it, and even just from a 2025 perspective, Tripp, with all that's coming back for Penn State, with Aller, the two running backs, Denai Dennis Sutton, some of the Zane Durant, it now with the Knowles hire, I know you hate looking ahead, but at least it does feel like in the preseason going into week 1, it does feel like Penn State is the number 1 team in the country. It does, because they have put the resources out there to put themselves finally in that upper level. Like you said, I 100% agree. What we say now doesn't matter. And even if Penn State, if it's well accepted that they are the number 1 team in the country in the preseason, means nothing. We've seen plenty of preseason teams fall out, flame out, and stink. They got to get it down the field. They got to beat Oregon, got to beat Ohio State, got to make another deep run and probably win a national title in the playoff. But it feels like from a player coach perspective, this is the best Penn State's been on James Franklin. And again, when you look at losses around the country, it does feel like right now they are the best positioned team, we'll say, to win a national championship going into 2025.
Yeah, and before we get to the Ohio State perspective, let's just break down Jim Knowles, and we're going to talk more about this later this week. But Jim Knowles, first year at Ohio State, right, led a ton of big plays. Ton of big plays. That was the problem with their defense. Next 2 years, number 2 ranked defense, number 1 ranked defense in the country. Great players, but really they don't blitz a ton, but they disguise their alignment and where they bring pressure from at the line of scrimmage. Really creative at the line of scrimmage in disguising what coverage they're in, what type of pass rush is going to come, where it's coming from, utilizing personnel. Obviously, you saw how they used Caleb Downs this year is a lot like Penn State ultimately used Jalen Reed and would have used him even more if KJ Winston had been healthy through the entire season. I think you look at Caleb Downs, you say, okay, Zakee Wheatley is the guy that probably plays a very similar role in that Penn State defense next year. Penn State's going to have really good corners, and Ohio State's they were so physical, their DBs at the line of scrimmage all year long. And they've kind of changed their defense a little bit. And it's not a full Vic Fangio, but like where they took away, hey, beat us underneath. And they were able to eliminate the big plays the last 2 years, which is a shift in the defensive strategy there. So that's what the Knowles defense looks like as it pertains to like personnel, style, and scheme. And it will be for them, as you talked about some of the names, how can you get Tony Rojas in the most advantageous position as a linebacker who can really run sideline to sideline? How can you continue to utilize Denai Dennis Sutton as the elite defensive end in college football next year. Zane Durant as a difference-making tackle like Ohio State had in Hamilton and Williams to push the pocket, close the pocket off. Wheatley in the secondary, King Mack, Day Lane, safety position. What does that look like using the linebackers? I think that's where like the Knowles on-field thing really becomes impactful in how he designs and disguises. And for Penn State now, though, it is the third different defensive coordinator in 3 years. So you go from Diaz to Allen to Knowles. I don't know that day one it's, they got Jim Knowles. It's okay, full steam ahead. Now their schedule starts the first couple of weeks, not all that challenging.
Right.
But by the time Oregon rolls into Happy Valley, late September, you got to be ready to go. Like that.
Absolutely.
That's for them. And everyone's going to have Ohio State circled November at the Shoe, right? November 1st at the Shoe, Halloween weekend.
Yes, sir.
For Penn State, the opportunity to play Oregon at home, and they still have to go on the road to Iowa. Indiana's on the schedule. Nebraska's on the schedule. It's not a super easy schedule. But if you take care of Oregon at home, then you feel like you're in control the rest of the way. You lose that game, then you're back, kind of like Ohio State this year, a little bit. Like there's a little pressure on you the rest of the year. So that, and we're going to talk portal, and Oregon's got like the portal is their roster for next year. That kind of is like the dynamic with this whole thing as it pertains on the field going into 2025.
Like you just mentioned, we're going to break down every team's transfer portal from 2025 because there's a lot of names, a lot of moving parts here. We're going to do 9 today, 9 later this week. So we'll get to kind of some winners, losers here in a second. But on the flip side here, Tripp, right? Ohio State's not used to being in this position. Losing a coordinator, a top tier coordinator to a lateral in-conference job, something that Ohio State is definitely, again, not used to, has to worry about a lot. So the question is now, where do they go from here? How do you replace Jim Knowles if you're Ohio State? And there's some interesting names that could be, connected to this job, that will be connected to this job. I mean, Ohio State DC, even with all the losses that they have in terms of graduation and the NFL draft coming off of this national championship winning defense, you still have a lot of talent there waiting in the wings. This is still a very high profile, big time job. And it's like whether you want to go with Randy Bates, who's Pitt's defense coordinator, but an Ohio State alum who has connections there to Columbus. John Heacock, who's Iowa State's right now defensive coordinator, but has connections to Ohio State. Mike Tressel, name sounds familiar. Jim's nephew, Wisconsin's defense coordinator. If you want to pluck an in-conference defensive coordinator, you want to promote from within. Matt Guerry, who, let me just read another quote here. This is not PR. I promise you, Tripp. This is from Ryan Day at the national championship celebration they had on Sunday. But he was talking about Guerry, quote, one of the brightest minds in college football, and I'm telling you, he's a star in the making. I don't know if that means for Day that he thinks he's ready to go now and take over this job, but that's at least a guy that at safeties coach for Day he feels very high in. And even I saw this name floated out there by 11 Warriors, Tripp. Jeff Hafley, a reunion. Now, he left, right, as BC's head coach to go to Green Bay to be their defensive coordinator for the Packers. Would he, I don't know what Hafley's career aspirations were. He clearly left BC, I think, in part because of frustration, maybe the current state of college football. So if you want to be in the NFL circles, is going back to college the way to go for you? Probably not. But he has connections there. He did a good job at his 1 year in Columbus before moving on to Boston College. There's no doubt you're going to get some big names for this job, clearly. Is there one that early on sticks out, you like? See how the process goes? Is there one way you're kind of leaning towards right now?
What about Jim Leonard?
So I'm glad you brought him up. I actually saw this today from, I think, Ian Rappaport, who reported that Leonard would like to stick in the NFL, which I was in. That's interesting. As Wisconsin's longtime DC, I kind of, but apparently now I don't know if he's sour about how the Wisconsin tenure ended, but
I will say, and just trying to read and see if there's any traction anywhere yet. One name that 11 Warriors, a great site that covers Ohio State throughout there, was Gerard Mayo.
But I think that's interesting. I think it underscores the fact that for this job, right, it's almost like no one's off limits. NFL, college football, almost no matter what your role is, this is one of those jobs that just drags you from wherever you are to come for it.
I think Jim Knowles did a great job at Ohio State, obviously, and you don't want to have turnover, and it's not like Ohio State's gonna not have their pick of candidates with their pool of $2.5 to $3 million for the job, knowing that they have Ryan Day and Chip Kelly and all that talent. It's probably just the passing of the baton for them, right? And I think when you get to this level, and we talked about it, I know you posted the clip on social media. Again, it's splitting hairs. How does this person adapt, recruit, fit? Like did we even mention the whole Jim Knowles St. Joe's Prep connection? Like Penn State has not been able to unlock that for years. Maybe he helps them unlock that as a guy who graduated from there. But for Ohio State, it feels like, okay, who's the best fit? Who gets along with our coaching staff and our players? And then who's going to scheme up a way to win a national championship? And they probably can pick pretty much anyone if they're interested to do it.
I think always an interesting debate too is like, do you promote from within and kind of keep the system the same, or do you go outside and bring an established voice in? Like, I think it's fascinating just because like there are a few internal candidates for Ohio State to where if you want to kind of keep it the same, you can. And it's kind of one of those things, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Sure, Jim Knowles, right, is the mastermind, you can argue. And so you're not having his level of coaching there and detail and expertise. But still, if you can get 80% of maybe what he had with that system and how it's run, and you still have guys like Igbinosin and Caleb Downs coming back, so you have a few key guys that are familiar with it, like, and maybe also too, like, because for Ohio State, it's not right, they went deep into the portal. A lot of the guys that they're going to play defense and be starters next year for them were backups this year, right? Or guys that played sparingly. Sonny Styles coming back, but again, a lot of that defense will be backups playing for the first time. And I think if you're Ryan Day, one of the things you have to wrangle with is to get those guys playing at a high level, right? There's a lot of talent on that Ohio State defense, but not a lot of experience. Does their transition, is it made easier by saying, you know, we're going to keep the system the same, try to keep the terminology the same, and just kind of new face, but same system? You could argue that's maybe the easier way for Ohio State with so much inexperience now on their defense versus bringing in a new guy and a new system and a new face and kind of relearning everything. And so now guys are getting used to not only becoming starters and having their plate fuller, but now also learning a new defense that they were in the last year or two. It's such a delicate balance and tightrope walk to do. It does feel like with all the inexperience, maybe I would lean towards internal promotion, try to keep the system the same and keep the terminology the same, but it's tough. It's really tough here when you go for guys that maybe aren't experienced, giving them a DC job for the first time, promote from within, versus having a well-established guy that's had, a history of success.
I muted my mic, but that was the sneeze that was 45 minutes in the making right there.
Which is impressive because right before we were about to record, just to go behind the curtain here, Tripp said, "Oh, give me a second, I got to sneeze." And like we waited a minute, it had like you sneezed, which by the way sounded like a cough.
Yeah. I was trying to coerce it out because there's no worse feeling than like you have to sneeze and you can't, and then sometimes you think about it and it's like, oh, I don't know, I can't pee. I don't know. It's like standing next to someone in a urinal, right? Like all of a sudden there's a little stage.
And the more you think about it, you're like, oh boy, I got to get out of here, take a lap, and reset. But that's it. Like that's 47 minutes here, but between when we first started recording, and we have some mess ups. So that's why when we talk about how long it is versus when you actually watch and listen to the pod, it's only like probably 20 minutes.
It wasn't that we screwed up talking. Like we're great at the yapping. It's the technical side of it.
Yeah, my computer sucks, number one. And I'm glad you think that we are good at the yapping. So yeah, don't worry about us and our skills. It's definitely not our skills. It's the damn computer. But that might be a record for the longest held sneeze in 47 minutes. Congrats to you, Brian Tripp.
And it was not meant to be held for 47 minutes and 15 seconds. To tie a bow on the Ohio State thing here, like I get the initial frustration, anger, disappointment. Knowles is a hero. He led them to a national championship. It's hard to do. They've only won 9. But to go, I think once you move on from the frustration, disbelief, like out of all places, Penn State, really? like the only place that'd be worse is Michigan.
Right.
It's why, I guess money, but I think it's kind of once you get past that, Ohio State's gonna be okay. We're gonna be okay.
Still win a national title. You still have that ring to hold on to. So that banner, I know, the timing also too, from Ohio State's perspective, sucks. And you have the national championship celebration on Sunday. Jim Knowles is not there. His future is basically looming over the program. And again, it's going to go in conference to but again, I would much rather be Ohio State right now than Penn State in the sense of You won. There's no guarantee for Penn State. You have the ring, you have the hardware, you have the banner. You have the guarantee. Penn State's trying to replicate what you did and also trying to replicate what Michigan did 2 years ago. But now that challenge to them starts, or at least for Ohio State, you have that to hold on to. And that's not going anywhere anytime soon. I guess we could argue, Tripp, everyone's trying to chase right now Ohio State, right? They're reigning champs, did the job. And one of the best ways now we've seen in college football to kind of get to that level Ohio State is currently at is through the transfer portal. And so we figured, okay, there's a lot of movement, and a lot of it happens also during the postseason, right? During bowl games, during the college football playoff. So it's hard to keep track of who's on the move, who's where. Oh, that guy left and he ended up here. So we figured, okay, let's do like a refresher, like a transfer portal update, if you will, about the conference. So we have all 18 teams. We're going to get to 9 today, 9 later in the week here as well to kind of give you a thought on every team's transfer portal status. Kind of do a little winner loser, just overview of the offseason. No recruiting rankings, just all about transfer players, who left, who stayed, who retained talent, who upgraded positions, who didn't. So, Tripp, let's start with Indiana, the portal kings, right, from last year, turning over that entire roster under Kirk Cignetti. They obviously, because of the portal, had a lot of exodus this year with their team. So it's going to be a whole new team here for 2025. When you look at what Indiana did in the portal, would you say winner, loser, maybe indifferent here, kind of wait and see? How would you assess Indiana's portal class for 2025?
Yeah, for them, because they're still at the point where they're building that base in recruiting, and you don't get the immediate results in recruiting because of one really, really good season with Kirk Cignetti. So they have to hit at key positions. And obviously the key position on the offensive side is the quarterback. Losing Curtis Rourke, who comes in from a MAC school, and this time they stay in a Power 4. And Fernando Mendoza from Cal, who we've talked about a couple of times in this essence, so I'm not going to go deep into it. I think by getting him, that's the linchpin of this portal class. I think Indiana did a really, really good job again, but because of getting him, it's a winner. The other key players are right. Roman Hemby, what's left in the tank for the former Maryland running back who has battled injuries? We've seen flashes, but you just, like, he's one of those guys you're not sure entirely what's left. But I think getting him, again, from a Big Ten school is a valuable pickup. Then the tight end, Holden States from Tennessee, another. Can you supply Mendoza, the wide receiver position? What are you going to do there? Can you supply them with those playmakers on the offensive side? And then defensively, because of how old they were, but how good they were at cornerback, they're going to have to make a couple of additions there. So they get Knighton from NIU and Gandy from Pitt. And again, those are probably the top 5 guys that bring in, but I classify Indiana as a winner. They really need to hit on Mendoza. I think they did. He had a really good year. Cal had that great start. He's versatile. He's got a little bit more dual threat than Curtis Rourke, and he should be the guy then that Kirk Cignetti can use in that offense to really lift them forward again moving into 2025.
And I think he fits what they need. Like, I think it's also a thing that's overlooked in the transfer portal. Like, oh, what's his star rating? What was his production at his past school? Like, sometimes if they are not the right fit for the system, for the coach, for the program, it doesn't matter what their star rating was or what their production was. And I think when you talk about Mendoza, I think he's a great fit. Like, in terms of what Kirk Cignetti wants from his quarterback, kind of a point guard kind of style where just get the ball out fast, make good decisions. Mendoza only had, I believe, it was 6 interceptions at Cal last year. So like, he does a good job of holding on to the football, keeping it out of harm's way. Like you said, more athletic, so you can maybe get more dual threat and more dynamic play from quarterback than Curtis Rourke was kind of a sitting duck back there in the pocket a little bit. I think he's a great fit for what Indiana's trying to do offensively. I'm with you. I think that's a big win. I like what Indiana's done now for the second year in a row in the transfer portal. How about Nebraska, Tripp? Yeah. Big time incoming class they got in the transfer portal. Matt Rule kind of talked about in the offseason. There's going to be a lot of turnover. He said 30 to 50 guys could kind of outgoing, ingoing here, roster turnover. And they really start, as he goes into year 3, they really start to kind of plant their roots and kind of get this program going to where ultimately, right, they're trying to get to where Ohio State, Penn State is right now in terms of being in the national title conversation. And I think they did a great job. I mean, this is one where, would you agree with 24/7 Sports? They have them as the number 1 ranked transfer class in the Big Ten. When you look at some of the names they have here, Tripp, do you feel saying that Rule did the best job in the Big Ten in terms of the navigating the transfer portal for this year?
It's interesting because, and I'm not going to go that far and say that, because just because you get a lot of transfers doesn't mean that they're all really good and key contributors. Like, they need to find what they need to do. And I think they did this by getting Elijah Pritchett, offensive tackle from Alabama, wide receiver Dane Key from Kentucky, Cal wide receiver Neziah Hunter. what they need to do is build around Dylan Raiola and give him the pieces to be successful this year. Because if that offense doesn't take the next step, then you have some real concerns about Nebraska with Raiola having a full year as a starter still a sophomore, but he's had a full year under his belt as the starting quarterback. It is ranked as a top 10 class, but often these rankings, like any recruiting rankings, are really based around the quantity as opposed to the quality, especially in this where there's so much, typically a recruiting class is between 23 and 27 guys. A portal class could be between 20 and 5. Like there's so much variability in the class sizes. I don't go a ton into the rankings, but I do think they did a good job of addressing areas to help Raiola. They brought in the edge rusher from Missouri on the defensive side because they lost a couple of big guys on the defensive side at the defensive end position. So, yeah, I think it's a good class. It is important to note that there are no more walk-ons. Everyone's on scholarship now. So it's the roster limit. When you hear them say 30 to 50 departures, yes, some of those are key players, but also some of that is you have to cut your roster down to 105. There's not this 120, 130 anymore. It's 105, and that's a hard line for everyone. So that's why he starts talking about that. Now, I don't want to change the subject, but why was Dylan Raiola in the Chiefs locker room after the game yesterday? Like, it's gone from unique. It's gone from like, okay, like that's pretty interesting to like a little bit weird.
I didn't have, I guess,
and I don't know the whole story. I don't know the whole story, but it's gotten a little weird to me.
This is what when I saw that, I thought it was more positive than negative. I think if you're a Nebraska fan, you can feel better about it because here's why. I don't think it hurts to be around greatness. No, like if that's the guy that he wants to model his game after, Mahomes, is there a better guy you can do it? And when he just comes to this guy, gets it done every single time, he's a winner. So you hope just by being around him, maybe something with Mahomes rubs off on him. The one thing, so I'm going to say right now it's a positive. But as we go into year 2 and year 3 and you watch more, the one, like where it turns into a negative possibly is if you try to do everything Mahomes does. Like in the sense of you're trying to be somebody you're not. Because while Raiola looks like him, wears the same number, he wears it for, I think, Tim Tebow, not for Patrick Mahomes, but he literally has his uniform with the arm sleeve, the undershirt, everything, exactly how Mahomes wears his uniform. I think there is a little concern of if you basically do if you start thinking, would Patrick do this versus should I do this? That's when you get into a danger zone because then you're trying to be somebody you're not, and you will never be Patrick Mahomes because there's only literally one Patrick Mahomes on this planet. I still think it's a positive now, but it is interesting. It is interesting to say the least. But I also think when you talk about transfer portal, like winners, losers, Tripp, right? I think what also has to be put into this conversation is the fact that Nebraska kept Raiola. It's not just the fact that they got some guys in the portal, but there was, rumors out there that there were some big time offers from other schools for Raiola to leave Nebraska and go there. And for Matt Rule and co to keep him, even with the offensive coordinator changes and kind of turmoil, if you will, we hired Dana Holgorsen midway through the year, pretty unorthodox of the timing of that. I know obviously there's a family connection, right? So you could say, oh, he was locked in. Money's money. And once you're there, maybe perspective changes. The fact that Nebraska, on top of everyone you said, the fact that Nebraska kept Raiola is to me what makes him a big winner here as well is because they are able it's one thing now, right, to recruit talent, but now it's a totally other thing to keep the talent that you recruit on a year by year basis. And that's why I think that partly, obviously, again, some websites, including 24/7, that was a top 10 class, number 1 in the Big Ten. Like you just mentioned, they got a lot of good talent. I think some key areas: receiver, offensive line, 3 defensive linemen with a lot of experience as well from Mizzou, Florida State, and Ole Miss. So they got some production as well coming in that should be able to fit some of the losses they have going out. I like what Nebraska did. And again, I think what can't be overlooked is some of the talent they helped retain, obviously including number 15, as some would say, Patrick Mahomes Jr. You made a great observation.
And that is why, again, that's why that whole conversation's out there with the tampering. Because Jeremiah Smith reportedly was offered $4.5 million to leave Ohio State. So to your point,
I would love to know. I would probably say, if I had to guess, Texas, maybe Georgia. I bet you there's a few programs that had that fish hook, if you will, dangling out in front of them. he's not leaving. Good for Jeremiah Smith. But yeah, it's a new world where you are the best player, and all of a sudden, it doesn't matter where you are, offers and more money be flowing in every single year. Yeah,
And that's why these schools, like, we'll probably talk about it more on Thursday because we're going to talk about USC on Thursday. But them hiring the GM away from Notre Dame is one of the big moves in college football, right? Like, that is a huge move right now because you need someone who understands roster management, salary cap management, because every school is not all of it's going to football, but $20.5 million to work with. Then you add on to that NIL. It's what's the player salary going to be? What are we going to allot to each player? How are you going to distribute it? It's certainly not going to do it evenly. Like, if your school wants to give $10 million to your starting quarterback, they can, and it's legal. And then you can get NIL. And then is somebody going to be deferred down the future? Like, it's a whole thing. And that's why one of the big moves of the week is the hire. Like, we're going to talk about USC at length on Thursday because they've had as tumultuous a portal cycle in probably last 3 months that any school could have in terms of roster turnover, coaching, like the whole thing. But what a move to get that, to do that. Like, that's the date to get Chad Bowden to go from Notre Dame to USC is a move, and he's expected to make more than $1 million.
To your point too with NIL, I think an area that's not talked about enough is the fact that I think like water will find its level eventually, where like if you're throwing a lot of money at players, at coaches, like if you miss, it's not a moneyless pit here when it comes to just specifically NIL. Like if you have a coach that, can't recruit well or can't develop well, and you're giving a quarterback, a running back, whatever it may be, $1 million, $2 million, and they don't pan out, maybe the first time it doesn't happen, the second time doesn't happen, third time doesn't happen. Sooner rather than later, the donors are going to start saying, is this it does get to a point where if you start missing on some of these players and coaches, like I think that the well starts to dry up or the heat comes on the coach more. And it's just, I think it also underscores the fact that resources are important. We talked about Penn State, right? Having the resources to pony up to get Ohio State's DC away. Having the resources, number one, first and foremost, is very important. But also then getting it right and making sure that money is spent wisely is also just as important.
Yeah, but if you're going to distribute that money too, like how is it? Is it 1 year? This is what you're getting, and then the next year, hey, actually, you didn't perform. We're taking you from 1.2 million down to, or we're taking you from 500,000 down to 300,000, or even like in the case of it's not a huge name player, but a contributor. Maybe it's a starter. Maybe it's your number 2 receiver. Say that number 2 receiver is offered $250 to stay at your school, but he can go to another school and get $450 or $500. Like there's so many things. And then I think we're still going to learn how it plays out. Like, are they on a 4-year contract? Are they on a 5? Are they on a 3? Like, how does this ultimately play out? That I think is fascinating. And every program is trying to be ahead of the curve and not be late to the game and trying to figure out. And these are the dynamics of modern college football that probably aren't discussed enough nationally, that people don't realize how many variables are at play with this money that now everyone has. Now, some schools will still have more than others because of NIL, but everyone is getting a cut of the revenue share. So how do you distribute it, and what's your plan?
And I think when you look at some classes, because you highlight too, when it comes to transfer portal, sometimes it's about quantity, other times it's about quality. You look at Oregon's transfer portal class, right? I think we can highlight, Tripp, this was all about quality. They didn't get a ton of guys in the portal, but boy, when they did, they got some studs. Purdue safety Dylan Thieneman, number 1 safety in the transfer portal. They get out or in conference of stud freshman All-American back in 2023. Really good player for them even this year as well. You get Taron Johnson out of Northwestern, 2024 second team All Big Ten, another interconference steal for Oregon. Emmanuel Pregnone, like they just rated basically everyone in the Big Ten, offensive line, safety, corner. Oregon went all in on quality, not quantity. Also, when you recruit that well, you don't really need the transfer portal most times if you hit, outside of maybe a few losses here. We could argue, Tripp, because again, when you look at the rankings, we just talked about Nebraska, at least according to 24/7 Sports, having the best transfer portal class in the Big Ten. Part of it's just the number of players they got. Oregon did not get a ton in terms of quantity, but it feels like no team in the Big Ten did better quality-wise in the transfer portal than what Oregon did here in 2025.
But it's not just portal players. It's the players on their roster, too. No one probably has more turnover going into next season among the top 10 teams or anticipated top 10 teams in college football than the Oregon Ducks. You lose your quarterback, your running back, your receivers, your tight end, your starting tackle who's going to be a first-round pick, what you lose on the defensive side. So all these players are going to have to – they're going to have to mold together and try to win football game. And that's not always a guarantee. I think it's a safe bet with Dan Lanning and the culture, but we saw them start a little slow this year when they had some injuries on the offensive line. But you're going to ask, like, Mekhi Hughes, the number one running back in the portal that they get from Tulane, had 17 touchdowns, over 1,400 yards, probably going to be thrust right into action. Those defensive guys thrust right into action. Bear Alexander, how does he fit culture-wise there? Is this a guy, like, what's that deal? Obviously, a highly gifted player, but how does he fit? Does he work? Now, just bringing everything together isn't a guarantee, but yeah, this is a very talented group that they're bringing in, and it has to be because they do lose a lot.
No, you're right. And even like going to Nevada, getting their offensive tackle, Isaiah World, like it's one where it's a lot of plug and play and there's no development. It's you're coming in a year or two and you're playing right away. We saw Indiana, it worked out to perfection. They made the playoff, right? For other teams, it's not a guarantee every year. You do trust Dan Lanning when it comes to recruiting guys and finding talent that fit the system, fit the program. Does feel like he did a good job here in the portal with some of the high level guys they did get, but Oregon, yeah, not a ton of quantity in terms of just number of commits, but a whole, as we just talked about, a whole lot of quality where you talk about 2-year starter in Thieneman, starter in Taron Johnson, starter in Pregnone, starter in Hughes. We're like, they got a lot of players that played a lot of football, both in the Big Ten and outside as well, where at least experience should not be a factor for Oregon here as well. Really quick, actually, about Oregon, this is fascinating. And when it comes to like the new world of the transfer portal in college football, this was also fascinating as well, because one of the losses Oregon technically had, but you could argue not even felt on the roster, was their quarterback. Here we go. I'm going to try to get this right here. First time. Jaron Kiwe Sagpolitelli. I probably screwed it up. My apologies. That's the best I could probably do. But they literally just got him like 3 weeks ago. Get him in the 2025 recruiting class, early enrollee. He was between him or Cal, flips the last second from Cal to Oregon. And then like right after the Rose Bowl, goes in the portal, goes back to Cal. Like that's now one where we have seen guys defect from programs while being on campus for 2 weeks. It's a new world. It's interesting. I don't know what changed for Sagpolitelli in terms of, I don't know if he thought he would compete for the job with Dante Moore and then kind of saw how good Moore was and said, oh boy, I'm in trouble. Whatever it may be, he's in and out. Again, it's a loss that you could say Oregon doesn't even feel because he's there for so little time that you can't even really factor him in. But that's part of the new world of the transfer portal.
That's like Caden Proctor last year, left Alabama, went to Iowa, and then he ended up back on Alabama's roster last year.
That's right. Oh,
that's crazy. 3. We still have 6 more to go on this podcast. So, and it's easier to talk about those 3 than probably the rest of this group. Washington, though, another winner, we think, in this portal window. Obviously, adding the defensive coordinator, Ryan Walters, former Purdue head coach, goes there, replaces Steve Belichick. We think that's a win for them, not necessarily a portal, but then what's he have to work with? Already a talented defense to get Arizona corner to Tacario Davis, all Big 12 second team. He's a really, really good player and was one of the prized acquisitions of this. FCS safety, Alex McLaughlin, number 5 safety, 96 tackles, 5.5 sacks, 2 interceptions, a couple of top 10 linebackers, right? Washington this year, good on defense, offense up and down, eventually want to turn the offensive keys over, and they did at times at the end of the year to Damon Williams. So you're hoping he elevates that offense. They bring in Amari Evans from Penn State, hoping to get at least some home run plays from him. He has Big Ten experience. Get a tackle from Kansas State, but really continuing, Jed Fish, probably no surprise, build this thing defensively. You got a good coach there. You got a good defensive coordinator. And now you got a little more talent on that defense too. Washington feels like they can win with a physical, aggressive defense, and they get pieces. You talk about fit, they get pieces that really supplement what they want to do.
And you're right. And you just highlighted basically everyone outside of Kansas State's tackle, Carver Willis, everyone is on the defensive side. of the ball for the most part in terms of the most impactful players they got for the transfer portal. So, like you said, Jetfish doubling down on defense, getting a lot of experienced players as well now to come Seattle to play in that defense here in year number 2. The thing that, like, I think we were talking about Washington Tripp at an even higher level and a bigger winner. If they were able to hold on to Jonte Cook, the talented former Texas receiver who kind of like just Sagapolatelli we were talking about, was there at Washington, committed, then all of a sudden, like a week or two later, now is out in the transfer portal and leaves. Super talented, would have been a big ad for Damon Williams going into 2025. They lose him, kind of, again, that's part of the transfer portal business here, whether it was money, whether it was whatever it may be. Something clearly was not working in the week or two he was there. Now he's gone. But Washington, again, so far a pretty successful portal window for them as they now try to plant some roots here with Jetfish in year number 2. Big loser, I would say easily the biggest loser of any team we're going to talk about here, Tripp, is just Purdue. And this is, when we talk about additions in the transfer portal being good for some of the top teams, this is one of the schools that probably will be a big loser now for years to come and really is going to make Barry Odom's transition from UNLV to Purdue that much more difficult because a lot of the guys we've already named, Thieneman, we're going to talk about Max Clare a little bit, who went as a really good tight end, went from Purdue now to Ohio State. Their best defensive player, Will Helt, transferred from Purdue. Of all places, Clemson. Welcome to the transfer portal, Clemson and Dabo Swinney. And even their punter, Keelan Crimmins, who was a really good punter last year for the Boilermakers, goes in conference, goes from Purdue to Illinois. And you could argue, Tripp, the 4 best players Purdue had last season are now all gone. Some of them in conference, some not. Sucks.
That's going to be the challenge for these teams. How do you get out of the cellar where players want to leave and it could be just a money thing, right? They're going to have money to work with next year, but how do you keep your players when they can be poached in conference and have, like, if you're a good player at a school with a losing record that doesn't have a chance to compete, whether they tamper or not, and who knows, you're like, what are those conversations at the end of the game? Hey, great game. Can't wait to see you wearing scarlet and gray, maize and blue, blue and white, green, yellow, black, pink, black, like, those conversations are going to happen. I don't know how you stop it.
You can't. It's basically impossible. Look, Dan Lanning raved about Thieneman after Oregon played Purdue early this year. Like, you can't stop a coach talking to a player after the game, talking about a player after. I have no idea how you patrol it. It's one of those things that's just it's kind of the reality. I think it's too hard for Purdue, and it's going to be on Barry Odom, where again he's going to use the transfer portal and brought in 25 plus players. Again, first year roster turnover, but it's going to be about development, getting those 2 or 3 star guys, trying to turn them into stars and keep them there.
Or Purdue, you got a guy who excels in the MAC, you got a guy who excels ACC even. Right?
Yeah.
Here's your chance. So it's a pecking order. It's a food chain. Like, as much as it impacts them in that element, they can also still use their leverage, the money, the $20.5 million, and they can do it to other schools too. So Barry Odom's got his hands full. It's a tough job, but it's not impossible, right? Like, we just saw what Kurt Signetti did at Indiana. This is the same conversation everyone was having about Indiana for years. There are avenues. It takes a special coach, a plan, resources to do it, but it's not impossible anymore, which is really fascinating about this whole portal, NIL, salary cap era.
And the reality for Purdue is kind of the same one for Northwestern here as well, where just some of the names we just talked about, again, not only lost some of your best players, but also in conference as well. Taron Johnson, we just talked about, going to Oregon. You lose your offensive lineman, Josh Thompson, goes to LSU. Safety, Devin Turner, goes to Baylor. It's the same thing, right? Purdue, Northwestern, a lot of these schools are in the same realm. Like you said, it's either getting those diamonds in the rough in high school, or like you said, trying to just lure other players from smaller conferences and say, hey, you want to play Big Ten football and start? Well, you come here and you'll be a day 1 starter here and we'll develop you. Like, that's what it is.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Maryland had an interesting offseason here, Tripp. When you look at the loss of Billy Turner, we mentioned last week, all 3 quarterbacks are gone. A lot of turnover there.
Yeah, I was gonna lump Maryland and Wisconsin together, both kind of in an interesting spot, right? Maryland, Wisconsin a little bit more I would say Wisconsin and Maryland because of the pressure on the coaches, Mike Locksley, Luke Fickell, probably a little bit different profile. Wisconsin's a more high profile program than Maryland, but Maryland's had some successful years here with Locksley, and because of who they play typically and being traditionally in what was the Big Ten East, we're never going to get over the hurdle because they had to go through Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State. Well,
Right.
now with conference schedules and balance, like Maryland's always been one of those teams that's kind of been close, but not able to do it. And I don't know if it changes now because who they play, where, but them and Wisconsin are similar where it's like, okay, this isn't a Purdue situation. There's been some success. There's been some talent. And again, Wisconsin, more high profile, tradition, history. I get it. Attracting different players. But not only do you have the connection there, like where they're at 500, hovering 500, Billy Edwards Jr. goes from Maryland to Wisconsin. Like that. And is he the guy? And then Maryland lands UCLA quarterback Justin Martin, who a former 4-star guy, played 3 games this year, a couple years at UCLA. To me, they feel their class that they bring into the portal feels similar. They're kind of in similar spots. I think both coaches are on the hot seat. And neither did anything all that spectacular here in the portal. So I think they're both in while 2 different programs with different perceptions, different challenges and obstacles, different history and tradition levels. To me, very comparable in a lot of elements right now.
And Wisconsin, too, it's interesting because, like you said, higher profile. So you think, and especially, too, with the pressure on Luke Fickell, that they'd be a lot more active in the portal and try to just bring in a lot of ready-made guys now to try to win. And you look at Wisconsin's transfer portal class overall, to me, Tripp, it feels like they lost more than they gained. Like you mentioned, you get Billy Edwards Jr., who's top 3 in passing yards. Okay, get experienced passer coming to Madison. New offense now with Jeff Grimes coming in, trying to maybe go back to a little bit older school, right? Maybe more ground and pound offense and kind of get away from the Phil Longo air raid offense that they tried to employ the last 2 years. But you look at it then, like you lose DB Xavier Lucas, who is, if you heard that name, it's probably in large part right now because of, again, a first-time disagreement between Wisconsin and Lucas about NIL, and is he allowed to go? And he just skipped the transfer portal altogether and enrolled in Miami in classes. That's, again, a lot of new here. That's a first. That's going to be interesting to see how that does play out. But Lucas is out the door going to Miami. You lose Will Pauling, your number 1 receiver, going to Notre Dame. You lose Tybee Walker, your number 1 running back. You lose both quarterbacks. Now I get it. Braden Locke was not very good in the time he played. Probably wasn't ready to play. Tyler Van Dyke came in, very little production, also got hurt early. And at least you get a replacement there with Billy Edwards Jr. But like for a lot riding on this year, it does feel like for Luke Fickell, Tripp, I was surprised that maybe there are not more impactful, high-level players got in the transfer portal where you try to just get experience and say, okay, let's just try to hit the guy running here and you're number 3 and try to get to 8-4 and just kind of tread water till we can really kind of dig our roots in and go forward. That was interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm not sure where both programs are at. Like, yeah, you broke down the Wisconsin group. Like Maryland, talked about Justin Martin, quarterback. Jameer Glasgow at cornerback from Wake Forest is a good pickup for him. Or Ratrell Perry from Central Connecticut State at tackle is a good one, but Dorian Fleming, but they're just replacing a tight end. Like it's a give and a take for each of these schools. Get a little, give a little, get a little, give a little. I think they're so marred in the middle that it may take a reset button hit for both of them to get to where ultimately they hope. But what even is the ultimate, like this is more big picture, but what ultimately for these 2 schools is the goal? You know, like is Maryland a basketball school? I haven't been recently, but what is the hope? What is the expectation? Like, does every school want to be Indiana and join the group? Like, I don't know. To me, these are just 2 programs right now that are in flux and in head-scratching situations. And you think you had your guy, but you're not sure. I don't know. I don't know.
And I think that's like one of the things with the transfer portal too is like you want to have an identity first and then build your roster to it.
Yep.
And sometimes if you're just plucking players for the hell of it, like it's kind of like you're spinning. Where the hell are you going?
Say that 5 times fast. Plucking players. Go ahead. I want to say.
You got it there twice. They're gonna keep
don't
on
want that
keep on
E
going.
next to don't need that E next to the podcast on Spotify.
No, we do not. Family friendly pod. So let's hear ended on this one, Tripp. How about
Yep.
Rutgers? Because that's another school that feels like it's in this kind of middle of the boat here. At least it does seem like they have an identity and what they want to build towards. With Greg Schiano being more of a defensive minded guy. And when we talked about like, okay, what do some of these schools do? Purdue, Northwestern, Maryland, maybe not Wisconsin per se, but like kind of schools in the middle.
Yep.
Are you going to go for more the dominant, the rough guys? You're going to try to, promise playing time. You're going to go to lower levels and get production, bring them up. That's what the latter is what they're doing, kind of going the Indiana model here, where they get some lower level FBS, FCS players with high level production and hoping that translates to Big Ten play where, you have Bradley Weaver from Ohio, who's a defensive end who had 8.5 sacks, 15 tackles for loss last year for the Bobcats. You go even lower than that, JMU, Eric O'Neal, 13 sacks, 18 tackles for loss. They get Cam Miller from Penn State. So at least there is a player with Big Ten playing experience that I thought played well for Penn State. The last year at least. So they go heavy on the defense and they take, I guess for lack of a better term, flyers on some guys with lesser or with playing experience and production and lower levels of FBS and hoping that can translate here to the Big Ten level. I like the direction Rutgers going. At least they have an identity of, okay, this is what we're trying to build towards. This is what we are. I think you saw Greg Schiano, again, not a ton of commits, only 11 in the portal. They're trying to really, especially in Jersey, kind of build up that recruiting base, which I think is a smart idea. But at least when they are plucking players, it seems like they have an idea of what they're trying to get every year, which I think it's half the battle.
Yeah, a lot of the other schools leave me plucking confused, but at least I know where they're going. Like I really like. I think they know what they are. They identify players, and I think Schiano, like this year, they salvaged, I would say, but because they know what they are, that's why I don't put them in the group of the two schools we just talked about. I think you hit the nail on the head on Rutgers.
It's very interesting here, but like I said, in this wild world of the transfer portal, also, by the way, as we're doing this, we still got a whole nother transfer portal opening in April. So I'm sure a lot of these rankings and praise or criticism maybe we're given now could change here in a few months. But that's at least the first time. So half the conference is done. We'll give you the other half of the conference transfer portal.
That was it.
Reactions, news.
It felt like we went through 15 schools. Like,
it's busy.
Portal. Oh my God.
It's so hard to keep track of.
Come on.
Especially too when you're talking about these moves being made again during bowl season, during playoff games, during the holidays. Everyone's distracted. It is very easy to lose track of who's going where, who left, who's hired, who's fired. So hopefully for those first 9 schools, maybe you learn something. Oh, this guy ended there. I didn't know they kept him. That's their goal here. Educate is what we're trying to do. Get everyone on the same page as we get closer now to have our eyes on 2025. So for those Eagles fans, for those Chiefs fans, hey, enjoy the next 2 weeks. I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun. For those not, we'll appreciate the pod. Make sure you subscribe wherever you do get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. I'm going to try to push through the Fly Eagles Fly whistle, which, by the way, impressive whistling. I'll give you that, Tripp. I can't whistle for. You want to do as the Philly mayor did? ELGLES. Maybe we can learn some spelling in Philadelphia for the next 2 weeks.
This is a great podcast. I look forward to getting together again Thursday, talking about the rest of the crew, and who knows what other news and notes we'll have between now and then.
That is true. There's no offseason here in college football, no offseason for Still Enrolled. So appreciate you watching. Talk to you on Thursday right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.